In this video for this STOic TTX Facilitator training, we're going to go over the logistics of delivering the scenario. Now, this video is just about the delivering of the scenario in a very simple way. These are the bits and pieces to pull together. Some of the skills in making the scenario work and adapting to the participants, those will be covered in a couple other videos. But for this video, we're just going to talk about the things that need to be covered off, the things that need to be done, and a couple tips and tricks on how to deliver this effectively. So at this point, you've identified the objectives, you've identified the attendees, you've set the level, you've built the scenario based on that, and now it is on the exercise day, you've got participants in front of you, and you're delivering the scenario. What do you do? How do you handle it? What steps do you take? There are a few phases that you can go through, which makes this easy, and there are some steps to go through as well, just to make sure things are covered off. I don't like to give the details of what the scenario is before the exercise, before the participants arrive. I like to keep that a secret as much as possible. The lead contact, someone might know because you've had to check with them and double check to see what the threat should be for this scenario. That's fine, but try to keep it as surprise so that people are forced to respond in the moment just like it would be for an incident. Once everyone's there, you want to go through basic introductions, who everyone is. If you don't know the participants, introduce yourself and your role in this entire exercise as well, and make everyone feel welcome and comfortable. Now, one of the things I like to do right off the bat, and this is not part of the framework, this is something I like to do, is I like to ask the participants for suggestions for tabletop exercise scenarios right off the bat. This does a couple things. One, it sets the pattern that everyone's ideas are valid, everyone has something to contribute, and they know they're coming to a tabletop exercise and they're imagining what things could be, and they might have a particular scenario in mind that they were hoping they might do today. Capturing that, recording it, putting it in the report at the end, and perhaps following up and doing those scenarios can be really, really important. The other thing that this does is it sets everyone in a creative mindset. You're immediately presenting them with a very open-ended and creative question. It lets their imaginations wander and it gets them into the right mindset for where you want them to be once the scenario starts. Once the scenario starts, you explain the exercise. You explain how the tabletops work, and you set some of the ground rules for how the tabletop goes. You want to inform them that there's no time pressure, that you're not in a race, you don't have to get certain things done in a certain time. And this is one of the reasons why we don't suggest having a preset scenario where certain injects have to be done, because that puts a lot of time pressure. Sometimes just that first initial impact, that first introduction to the scenario is more than enough for a lot of participants, and they need to spend time working that out for the rest of the exercise. Allow them that time and let them know that there is no pressure on this. The other thing you want to do is to let them know that this is a completely safe environment. There is no wrong answers from your perspective as a facilitator. There's no wrong answers. There's no answers that you are expecting from the participants either. This is all about what they would do and how they would handle situations. You also want to let them know that this is not a test. This is not an audit. No one's going to be graded on their performance or how the team works. None of that's going to happen. This is all about digging into their responses and digging into their processes to look for gaps. You also want to let them know that this is an interactive and discussion-based exercise, and people are free and encouraged to contribute, to say things that might even be wrong, and to ask the potentially stupid questions, because you want people asking these stupid questions or exposing what they're not sure about in a tabletop exercise and not an incident. So you want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable to be wrong, to be vulnerable, to perhaps say things that aren't correct, and that no one's going to think poorly of them for doing so. So make sure you set that tone and those rules for the exercise. Then at this point, you introduce the scenario. You present that initial impact, and you want to leave it up to them at that point. A great question to give is, so what do you want to do? Or how would you handle this? Or what's your next step? And just a simple question like that, after a very simple and generic initial impact, that first thing has happened, someone reports ransomware in their machine, what do you do? And then let them lead, let them respond. The more that you leave that initial impact open-ended and undefined, the more that people will try to fill in, the more that they have to respond to. So keep that initial bit as sort of generic and simple as possible and let them take the lead. Once they start responding, dig into those questions with open-ended questions of your own. We have a couple videos on how to ask questions and what some of those questions could be in order to keep the conversation going and how to dig in. So I'm not going to get into this right now, but what you want to do as a general principle is to start digging into those responses with your own open-ended questions and explore it. But it is all participant-led. You're not there to judge their responses. You're not there to say whether or not their responses are right or wrong. That's not your job. Your job is to get them to think about their own responses. Then as a facilitator, you're recording what they say. You're writing down the key controls that they're relying upon, the open questions, the concerns that they've raised, and the action items that they happen to mention. You're recording all these things, and as you're going, you're looking for those opportunities to ask these questions, to dig in, to look for those unknowns, to look for those dark corners where they're either avoiding talking about or where they haven't thought about. And you want to try to locate those and ask questions about them. And that's your job as a facilitator, pretty much in a nutshell, is finding the right questions to ask and keep people talking. One of the things I like to do at some point within the exercise is to recap. I have taken my notes, and there's a natural point where the discussion kind of comes to a conclusion. It sometimes takes 5 or 10 minutes, but they've sort of exhausted their thought processes and where they want to go with their responses. You've come back with some questions, some open-ended questions, and it sort of exhausts itself. Right? And you might not have an inject to use yet, or you might not be ready for one. And at that point, instead of putting an inject, one of the things I like to do is simply to recap. To say, okay, so you've said you're going to check the antivirus logs, you're going to use your endpoint agents to gather more information from the other endpoints, and you want to take a look at the logs on the firewall and look for malicious emails in your email server. Is that correct? And just recapping when the conversation kind of exhausts itself and you get into a dead end, that can do a lot to trigger people's memories, to get them thinking about things and then progressing further. At this point, you could continue adding more injects or let the conversation go. You don't want to beat a dead horse, as it's called. You don't want to force the discussion into oblivion. You don't want to just speak about something to death. You want to make sure that the discussion is lively and you've covered all of the corners and you've explored all the dark areas to make sure that you've uncovered the gaps. At some point, there's no more gaps. There's no more places to explore. Then you throw in an inject. Okay, so you've done all this and now you get a report that 10 more people are reporting ransomware. What do you do? Right? So at this point, the participants have a chance to progress, and you get to explore that new stage. At the end of the scenario, you then want to review. You want to recap, you want to review the things that have been said, you want to repeat back to them the things that they have said based on your notes, and make sure that everyone has had a chance to say everything that they want to say and everything's been covered off. Now, it might not be complete and exhaustive. At some point, you just have to end the scenario if there's so much more to say or so much more to explore. But that gives you an opportunity to suggest a follow-up tabletop exercise, something else to attempt, redo the exercise with slightly different injects, and that's something that you can suggest. Now, at this point, at the end of the exercise, I like to ask 4 questions. The first question is asking again whether or not they have any suggestions for follow-up tabletop exercise scenarios. Because now that they've been through the scenario, they might have had all kinds of imagination to say, ooh, we really should, go through a DDoS exercise as well, because I don't think we're prepared for that, or a variation on the type of scenario that you've just gone through. So I like to tie that up and allow people to make suggestions. The other thing I love to ask, and this can create its own bit of discussion, is what scares you about what we talked about today? That question can cause an awful lot of discussion. And I like to leave about 30 minutes at the end of a 90-minute exercise, if for nothing else, that question alone. The recap takes time and people got some details to add in. Asking about the new scenarios is probably not going to take that long, but it's the what scares you about what we talked about today. That can take a long time for them to discuss, because now they're no longer talking about the process. They're not talking about the technology, the skills they would use. They're out of their procedural head. Now they're into their emotional head. And when you get them there, you're going to get some emotional responses, but you're going to get some very actionable things that you need to write down, record, and include in the report. These are going to be things like, I really don't think that we've prepared our users enough for this particular thing. I really think we need to increase our user awareness and education. And that is a great point to put down in the report and in your notes. You need to be able to do that. And so it's looking for some of these bigger issues, these side or parallel issues that may not have come up, may not have fit to come up in the middle of the exercise, but you offer people the opportunity to bring them to the table and discuss them, and you get a chance to write them down. And they suddenly now have a lot of context and relevance in light of the threat and the scenario that you've just presented. The last question I like to ask at the end is to get the participants to rate two things. One, on a scale of 1 to 5, what did you learn in this scenario? I like this question because sometimes people don't feel like they learned a lot, but tied with the next question that I ask is, how useful do you feel this exercise was today on a scale of 1 to 5? Sometimes people might not feel like they've learned a lot, but it was really, really useful, right? They explored new things. They understood what their coworkers understand and think, and how they would behave in an incident. And so asking these two questions helps people put the exercise in perspective. They get other people's feedback on this as well. And it really helps just bring closure to the exercise as well. And I find it a very, very, very useful thing. Almost don't care about the numbers. I do care if the numbers are trending down. I would like to find ways to improve the experience for everybody. But I almost don't care about what the responses are. I want them to review their own experience in the exercise and bring themselves to some kind of closure. It makes for a much more satisfying exercise, and everyone walks away a lot happier. So those are the steps in delivering a scenario in a really high level, and just the basic things to progress through in the different phases of delivering a scenario. Now, the points on how to do this well in terms of participant engagement, how to keep that conversation going, how to make sure people are contributing really high value discussion points, and how to manage participant experience, how to make this as interesting and as engaging as an experience as possible. Those are going to be in separate videos in order to cover this as a much higher level skill and something to really delve into. But what we've gone through today are the phases for delivering a scenario at a really high level.